become the basis for actually rebuilding the state system in a place where, for all practical purposes, it does not exist. For all of these reasons, when we recognize the undesirability, for instance, of arming children, we understand that in some cases the definition of children is different, and we think of this set out. If you're old enough to be raped, if you're old enough to be carried off by rebel groups, if you're old enough to protect yourself, and that's where we have an obligation to help people do so, and that's where we stand on the proposition.
From Cambridge H to oppose. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I think my job today in first opposition is to really have a look at one of the particulars of children. What happens when we give children arms and what happens when we allow them to participate in warfare in the way that first proposition would have us do. Because in fact, that is the exact thing which they failed to do, which they needed to do on that side of the house, which is tell us why children in particular. Because they gave us many reasons about how it's a good idea to supply arms to the native country and help and allow individual factions to have control over the areas in which they have to deal with in the current chaotic environment. But at no point did they begin to tell us anything about what is specific about giving children arms, and that is what I'm going to do for you today. And if the ground happens to open up and swallow me whole while I'm doing it, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. So, why are children soldiers so bad? I want to have a look at two things with regard to that. First of all, the issue of the children themselves, and the relevance of the fact that they can't fully consent in any meaningful way to participating in warfare. Then I'm going to secondly look at the issue of war crimes and why we think that getting children involved psychologically in warfare so early leads to creating kinds of soldiers who the international community have a responsibility of ensuring have as little participation in warfare as possible. And then lastly, I'm going to talk, thirdly, I'm going to talk about the idea of this spreading the harms into different regions, which we have in Parisian POI, which wasn't addressed. And then lastly, I'm going to look at the idea of the psychology of children and how this will affect the nature of the warfare they'll participate in. So first of all, the idea about consent. Now, in many other circumstances when we legislate with regard to children specifically, we have to take into account the fact that they can't meaningfully consent. And what I mean by this, I think this is relevant in three ways. First of all, we say that, like standardly, the nature of childhood is such that you're not really in command of your best interest. It's harder for you to picture what your best interest will be, and therefore it's harder for you to make choices which we can really consider as being purely rational and aligned with your self-interest, which hasn't yet developed. Right? That's really important because when I decide, to take the offer that the UN's given me by supplying me arms, I'm not fully capable of imagining what I'm consenting to, which we actually think is an entire lifestyle, and will affect the rest of your life every single day when you remember all those people that you killed and all the times that you failed to protect your sister from being raped and such things, other things which you might have to do. But second of all, we think that the fact that one of the things that childhood is predicated on is being emotionally susceptible to propaganda. Now we think actually what happens is these children are much less likely to be able to keep up with the politics and kinds of things which we want them to be able to how we want them to be able to rationalise their fighting and their ability to kill people. And instead we think it's going to be much easier to persuade them to behave in ways as soon as you get one powerful child, really one man that's going to be able to command these child factions, it's going to be very easy for them to be persuaded to enter into warfare in a way which we think adults wouldn't suffer by having to do. And the third reason, the way in which we think that the method of recruitment is going to be fairly involuntary, is because we think that it's impossible to expect a child to have fully formed a moral system at the ages of the kinds of ages that we had first proposition talk about. Ages like 12 and 13, where we really can't say that they're making a choice which is in accordance with any kind of real moral evaluation. And really, it's going to be simple things like the guy that's offering me the gun, do I want to participate in that? Or was my sister killed and do I want retribution? And maybe we want children and soldiers to kind of be able to rationalise or kind of at least contextualise their warfare in a kind of moral framework which we know that they develop themselves. I'll take Jordan.
If I'm about to be killed by someone, if my sister is about to be raped, you would not say I don't have the right to pick up a gun and prevent that. Why do you prevent me from doing the most effective way of resisting, which is organising with others, no matter what my age?
Sure. I understand that concept, and that's why we don't have an international ban on a child defending themselves if they need to. But that's very different from saying we should systematise and allow the international community to organise children. again, first proposition, you don't seem to understand that the burden here is really to talk about the nature of children, while children in particular, just the fact that they can be killed, isn't the same as making the argument that it's better to give them, weapons than to give adult men who are able to make consensual choices to protect them. Right, so moving on. So second of all, let's look at the kind of criminals that you end up, criminals and soldiers that you end up with if you allow children to participate in war. Now what happens is, because as I've established already, they can't make these decisions consensually, and because I've established that they haven't got a moral system, what you get is essentially very early psychological damage being inflicted on these children, which means that you remove what is a key part of the guarantor that war is going to be carried out in a responsible way, and that is the kind of level of human compassion, which ensures that war crimes are unlikely to be committed. Like if I'm made to kill someone at the age of 12, if I have to, or rather, if someone tells me that it's okay and that it's expected of me by my faction to exercise retribution on someone who's maybe raped or killed my sister, then I'm allowed to expand that to every other time I see any harm inflicted on someone else, and that's really important because that means that I lose the kind of sense of human compassion, human decency, understanding that it's an unfortunate political framework that I'm operating in where it now becomes acceptable for a short period of time to kill someone and inflict that damage, and I actually understand that's a system that should apply in every case. That's really bad. Why? First of all, for the freedom of the children themselves, but second of all, because the kind of communities that we're now breeding are likely to include war crimes. So what we say is this is actually an important derivative. Like, if the international community is going to legislate against anything, it should probably be preventing children all across conflict zones from kind of internalising systems of warfare to the degree that they don't actually get that comfort with the level of human compassion which we say comes with development when you grow up. So that's really important too. Okay. Also, another kind of minor point, but also, these children aren't going to be able to understand how the communities outside of where they're immediately operating, because they don't have this wider sense of the world, how other communities evaluate what they're doing. Like, they're only going to be able to experience the ideas of these crimes in the context where they're acceptable. Nowhere will they understand that eventually they're going to have to face a war crimes tribunal, for example, if they show undue cruelty. Because they don't even come across that, they don't even know what that means. They never get to understand that in the wider context or non-conflict areas, these things aren't acceptable, and that's going to be really important for the reintegration of the country, which Rishi's going to talk about later. So lastly, the idea of spreading harm, we think just briefly that what this means is that not only do children become targets, which obviously first proposition seems to be okay with, but more importantly that areas which formerly weren't targets become embroiled in conflicts which otherwise they wouldn't have done, because now areas which aren't even politically aligned with any faction necessarily suddenly have a stock of children who are, as I've said, aren't able to consent and emotionally susceptible and are going to be ready and willing to participate in warfare in a kind of grand way, and these places now become embroiled in conflict, and that's also important for restructuring and the reintegration of communities after warfare, which is what Teresa is going to tell you about. So it's actually not a first position to have you characterised as simple as if I'm 13 I'm old enough to get killed, therefore I'm old enough to kill, because of all the conclusions that I've told you about. Just very briefly afterwards, the one thing I know, the only advantage I have on this table is the fact that I'm also kind of nearest the child than anyone else here, and I can tell you one thing. We're much more likely, and I see like the boys at my university, they like to play a lot of games that I wouldn't want them to actually have guns with. Like, so it's a whole different game that we're playing, because you're able to form factions, you're able to split up, you're able to be much more swayed by individual charisma, and these things are really important when we talk about the kind of communities that want to have guns. Guns are dangerous, don't play with them, and don't get children who play with things to have them.
John Benson, KCO, AAT, John Gary.
It's great to be back at SOAS, just want to say that. Good. Okay. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure who's in the chair. Whatever the Speaker is. Fine. Our proposition wants us to believe that what the proposition wants is to take children